Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of Tech Thursday discussion panel hosted by CXOTVnews. Uh, Today's panel is all about discussing the hot topics in the market, which is AI, because suddenly there is a lot of awareness around AI, even not only amongst tech community, which was clued in into this since last few years, but all of you will, agree with me that there is a lot of interest which has generated within the business community as well. There is a lot of experimentation going on, and everybody is trying to have their own use cases, experiment their own way, whether it is tech leaders, whether it is business leaders, about how they can deploy AI in their specific use case scenarios. Now, this is the general excitement in the market, but one thing which is bothering all the tech leaders is AI as a capability has focused on centralized data sets in last so many years, and all the capabilities which we have deployed have used that methodology. But as we move along and the volume of data increases, we are real a new set of problems coming in front of us. There are decentralized silos of data which are big enough in itself. And the question arises is there a future where we need to start thinking about how we can use this decentralized data sets and help build the AI capabilities on top of this, and what value such a capability will create for us. So that is the discussion. That journey map is the discussion topic for today. And we have some eminent leaders from the industry over here joining us. So let's start this round by first all of us introducing ourselves for this who are on the panel discussion. So can I request Ravindra to start, kick this off and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Vishesh. Thanks for having me here. I am Ravindra. I am a data and AI leader at Misho. I look at ranking and recommendations plus monetization charter for Misho. Prior to Misho, I have worked with few other startups where they were mostly data driven. One was Flipkart, Goldman, Hike Messenger, to name a few. Overall, I have around 15 plus years of experience in the industry.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ravindra. Parvez, we'll move on to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Parvez. I have around 20 plus years of experience in the IT plus the data industry. I've been working with various banks and retail industry, and been in the data and AI space from the last, in the AI space from the last 8 years or so. I've been with clients in the client locations and also with startups, and build our data extraction, data management, data reports, and also coming to the next level of AI and ML part of it. So I've been in that space, and I've been totally involved in this space for close to. I started off my career as a Java developer and moved into this data area from last 15 to 16 years now in this space, and I've been doing this work.
Thank you, Parvez. Suresh, very quickly over to you.
Thank you, Vishesh. Hi, everyone. I'm Suresh Reddy. I work for GE Vernova Power Conversion. Overall, around 23 years of experience, out of which 19 years has been with GE. Mostly my first half of my career has been around ERPs, multiple domains within the ERPs. And the second half has been more on the leadership, whether it's IT leadership in a manufacturing plant or IT leadership in setting up the business process outsourcing for GE. And recently, I'm leading the data analytics and automation for GE Power Conversion, which is part of the Vernova business.
Thank you, Suresh. And finally, last of the bunch, myself, I am Vishesh Kaul. I am the Chief Information and Digital Officer for Prestige Group. It's a real estate company. And so I lead the digital charter, which includes data and AI for Prestige as well. In my previous life, I was responsible for transforming the in-store operations for a large global FMCG player successfully in Southeast Asia. Yeah. So that's the panel for today, and let's kickstart the discussion, which will capture the imagination of people who are listening to this, listening to this video. So let's start talking about the core concept of AI. right? And we have different industry representations over here. We have Suresh from energy. We have Ravindra from e-commerce, or is it called social commerce now, Ravindra? I'm not so sure. Where does it fit in? So possibly you can educate us when you talk about the AI use cases. And then we have Parvez from banking and me from real estate, quite diverse industries. But all of us are experimenting with AI. What I want to understand to begin with is that how is AI driving value for your industry or your organization? Very specific, any use cases which are getting delivered. We'll start with Ravindra over here, if that's all right.
That works. Thanks, Vishesh. So first I'll answer your social commerce versus e-commerce thing. So it has become kind of synonymous nowadays. Like even traditional e-commerce companies, they tend to leverage social networks to kind of generate leads. So I would say Meesho started as a social commerce player where it tapped onto WhatsApp network of users. But over time, that boundary has been blurred. Like it has become an e-commerce player as well. It competes with Flipkart and Amazon directly now. Right?
Yeah.
Sure. Now coming to the use cases that are being powered by data and AI at Meesho. So in an e-commerce marketplace, there are multiple touch points where we get the opportunity to present a very sophisticated kind of feature to the users, right? One of it is basically recommendations. So users, when they're coming onto our screen on a mobile app, they only have limited space. And we need to make sure out of millions of products that are available on our platform, how do we surface the tens of those which this user is going to click and convert on, right? And so that's one very peculiar use case where we kind of use data and AI to a very large extent, and we make sure that it has serendipity, it has the nuances of the user's interest captured in, the intent of the user session captured in, right? So that's one important use case. Then we also use AI in the space of logistics side of things. So where you have fraudulent users coming onto system and gaming the system. So there are multiple types of fraudulent users. Sometimes sellers, the suppliers themselves act fraud. Sometimes it's the users who tend to accept certain products and they return something else altogether. So these are the kind of use cases where we are applying AI mostly, but there are other productivity related use cases also where we use some sort of AI, I would say LLMs to be specific nowadays, right? So we have started using these in some tech productivity, developer productivity use cases as well.
That's brilliant. So not only AI is helping you in securing your bottom line, but you're actually using AI to drive the top line for your organization as well. The recommendation example that you gave, that's quite a well-known example. Everybody in the e-commerce industry uses that. Thank you very much for that, Ravindra. Let's quickly move on to banking. And Parvez, what do you have to tell us about how is AI driving value in your industry?
No, the recent use case which we have been currently working on is like something to do with the fraudulent, same kind of fraudulent on the cards, which is happening very, very regularly. So we're trying to make that's the use case we are looking at, what kind of frauds are happening and how do we look at from the machine learning or the LLM part of it to reduce this fraud and how this is happening. So the entire data set, and we are using the entire data set and also looking at from which areas, which zones, which geographies, segmentation, all that we are trying to do it now. And that is one of the things which we have been currently looking at. I think that is one of the recent use cases which we have been working upon, because a lot of instances of fraudulent fraudulent data is coming. Fraudulent usage of cards is happening across the globe, and when it is happening during some of the during the zone of festivals or when this occurrence is happening, and kind of we're trying to see how the users can be stopped, or how can we tag this to a group of people. So these are things which we have been looking at from that data which we are getting, and the data has now been quite matured for us. I think that's been the case, and that's how we are looking at that kind of a use case now. Even in the retail industry, I think we do a lot of things on the retail frauds and other things.
I would have expected nothing less. Being a banking person, risk should be on top of your mind. And you are using AI to reduce your risks exposure, particularly in the credit card segment. That brings me to you, Suresh. Energy, what's happening? What's the AI value driver?
So let me ask you guys, like, how would it be if you have a power cut at home, which is unplanned? Nobody likes it, right? Think about a power plant shutting down unexpectedly, and what is the amount of loss, not but the loss it will happen to the people who are consuming it, right? So AI is one of the areas which helps in predictive maintenance, right? Kind of understanding the data coming from these big machines and then figuring it out what can be done to reduce the outage times. That's one of the things, right? Another area with all this COVID, a lot of supply chain disruption has happened. AI can be in that area. We can look at a lot of historical data, a lot of these challenges that we are facing in the economic countries where there are restrictions. This keeps changing. So if we bake all these rules and regulations into the AI model, it's going to throw out a lot of insights to supply chain teams to replan their supplies to ensure on-time delivery to customers. The third one, which normally a lot of negligence is there, is within the organization, how AI can be used. Like, for example, in continuous improvements, the inefficiencies within the processes, the bottlenecks that are there within the manufacturing processes. AI can be used and is being used to identify these cases and then drive continuous improvements. So these are some of the, there are a lot of other places AI plays a role, but I thought I will touch upon these three things which is standing out for me.
Absolutely. You're right. If the electricity goes out, I don't like it at all. But what's interesting is that you have a very real life example of how we are using IoT to make the predictions on the predictive maintenance. For me, from real estate perspective, we are using a lot of AI, the AI capabilities to deepen our understanding of our customers and, taking the direct control of the relationship with them. That's the key use case for us. It directly impacts our top line. It also has an impact on our bottom line, but more about that in some other forum. Let's try to understand from these leaders over here. So with all these, there's a very clear AI value being driven in your organization, in your industry. You have mentioned it through your use cases. Now the question is that there's a very thin line between how data can drive automation and how it can be perceived as an AI capability, right? So what I want to understand is there a synergy between the three capabilities, data, automation, and AI? Or are these capabilities which can run parallel, may be used somewhere, may not be used somewhere? So what's the role of data and automation in delivering the AI capabilities? And what is the synergy between them in creating a business value? Let's start with you, Suresh, this time.
Sure. See, I personally believe data is the core for everything, but data brings out story. If we are able to connect the data and if we are able to then synthesize that data into meaningful information and then drive automation. So I am a big fan of data driving automation, not just listening from people and looking at their processes and automating it. Having said that, right, a lot of data is already available, but probably not in the form that it needs to be available, which can be synthesized and converted into meaningful actions or automations. Right? For example, we can analyze historical sales data, demand planning. So today, demand planning comes from our sales team. Why can't it be driven by data? Right?
Sure.
The historical data can tell us what kind of cycles the demand goes through, and that can be automated to feed into our planning system, which can actually give automatic demand planning, right? Another thing that we can also look at is, so since I'm coming from ERP background, normally our reorder point is based on quantity. So when something goes below a quantity, we reorder, right? Why can't we look at data to look at the inventory pattern and not drive by quantity, but drive by demand? So that could be also driven with data and automation coming to the. I can keep on talking about so many use cases, but I think if we are able to get the story out of the data, then we can automate a lot of things without depending too much on the business to spend their time and tell us what needs to be automated or how it can be automated.
Essentially, what you are telling me, Suresh, is the synergies exist between data, automation, and AI. So while AI as a capability can do the demand planning for you, a lot of automation can actually lead to that path, take away the decision matrices which are embedded in human elements today, and make it a much smoother process at the end.
Absolutely. Maybe I can add one more thing. Let's think about our finance organization, right?
Yeah.
Free cash flow is so important for the business.
Yes.
And I see data and automation, if they come together, the amount of information that it can give it to FP&A team to know on daily basis what's coming in and what's going out. So at the end of the month, they are not struggling to find cash. They can do day-to-day planning and execution so that they meet their right. Today, most of the companies run on month end or quarter end grappling in the last few days. But this data and automation coming together can convert some of these into daily operations rather than a monthly or a quarterly kind of an activity.
Rightly put across. And Parvez, just because Suresh used the parting shot, the example on the finance industry, let's go to you and let's hear from you. How do you see the synergies between data automation and if particularly this example of cash flow, does it bother you? Does it make sense from a use case perspective?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense because I think we from the data itself we start looking at building the automation part of it, and then we go to a next level of looking at from the AI perspective. So I think that is one thing which we currently look at. It's been data which we look at, and data has all the history and the real part of it, and what we need to do based on how we proceed on be it sales data or be it any kind of data which we look at. So I think that is one of the things, and that's from that part of it, I think we move into the next level of automation, and it's this all been interlinked together. So once you have the data, then you start looking at building the different models, and you start. Well, if the data is very less, I think you don't get into that space at all, right? So when you large bunch of data, you collect the data, and then you move ahead into this level of automation and the next steps, and you start kind of looking at from what kind of models, what kind of things can be given, what kind of reports or what kind of picture higher management and what kind of decisions they can take.
Ravindra, do you agree with this? Do you see this happening in your industry as well?
I think, Suresh and Parvez, they put a very nice picture. They projected a very nice picture where there are layers. One layer is your data, and then there is some sort of automation on top, and then there is the actual rules and models which are kind of driving the use cases, right? So it's no different in e-commerce. So here also we have these three layers. Data layer is where we have historical data. We also have encoded rules, the rules which are like very intuitive, already available by the rules of the world, the rules of the nature, because those are the ones driving data generation as well, right? So there are certain things you can encode right away, and then there are certain things where you kind of find patterns from the data, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the layer one, and layer two is where you try to build your pipelines, some sort of automation, and make sure that data is in some usable form, or the information or the insight is in some usable form in the AI layer, right? And at the AI layer, it can, again, the spectrum is too wide. You can code up a basic rule and call it an AI, and you can also go almost probabilistic, stochastic, and again, that would still be an AI system itself, right?
Yes.
So largely, it's the same architecture that is being followed everywhere.
Absolutely. But what I find, what I take away from this discussion is that stories are important. So looking at data and building a story is important. And then from that story, you can take a decision that is this a problem which will be solved only by automation? Can it be directly addressed by AI? Or is it a combination of both? And all the possibilities exist. And the value creation is in all the roots, is what I get out of this discussion. Brilliant. This is beautiful. Thank you very much for this. But let's get back to the crux of this discussion, which is around the centralization of data, or so to say, as we move ahead and big data piles are getting created, decentralization of data. how much of decentralization of data is happening in your organization? And do you see any pros and cons between using a centralized data set and a decentralized data set? Let's start with Ravindra over here.
Sure. So in e-commerce, I have been at Meesho for the last 4 years. But prior to this, even at Hike Messenger or Flipkart, we had already started moving towards a more decentralized setup for data access, right? And the reason for that was, again, explosion of data itself. Uh, so some form of data would still always be centralized, like some of the RDBMS, which are mostly transactional, are still very centralized, where you want more governance, more control, consistency. But information can exist on different zones, different layers, and those are not needed together always, right? In only some cases where you're trying to triangulate, you would want to bring those together. But in general, you could build your systems on top of these isolated data pockets itself, and you can generate value, right? So this is what I have seen. So wherever you you need tight control and governance, and you need consistencies, you need to stick to vertical scaling of your data itself. You keep it central. Wherever you can let go some of the consistencies, if you're fine with, say, 90-95% information itself, if 5% loss is fine, if you would still be able to reduce your rules, your algorithms, your models, you should basically choose a decentralized approach, right? So in industry, I've seen like we use both of these wherever applicable. So I would say it's a hybrid kind of a setup. It's not like you can work with just one versus the other.
It's not a new concept, at least in e-commerce, right?
Right.
Suresh, what's your point of view on this topic?
So before I go in deep into decentralized or centralized, right? What do we want to drive out of this? At the end of the day, there are 4 things according to me: speed, cost, accuracy, and security. If these 4 things can be taken care, whether it is centralized or decentralized, we are fine, right? At the end of the day, the outputs are going to come out. One of the things that I am really interested in is, why do we want to decentralize? We want to give the power to the users. They are the best people to know how to use the data and to see how so things become faster. And if we are going to have teams like a COEs or IT teams, we're going to delay things. We have to understand their perspective. First of all, we have to understand their requirements. We have to go through all the development, testing,
the whole cycle,
and all this stuff. And business doesn't have the appetite today for all. And that utilization. So I'm a big advocate that we should worry about what tools business is using, whether it's a Power BI, a Tableau, or whatever, right? All we have to focus on is we ensure the data is certified data. There is governed on cost, security, and speed. If IT can take care of this, then we can move towards more decentralization. But there are going to be certain which we cannot decentralize. If we are going to look at historical data to drive goods, then probably we need to have the volume of data, the volume of history that is required. And maybe we have to go towards centralized. So I agree with Ravindra. It would be a hybrid model between centralized versus decentralized. Both of them have pros and cons. I think as IT leaders, we have to pick and choose what works best, but we have to draw the governance and the data strategy model around both these models so that we can give the most effective solution to the business.
But Wes, do you agree? You are from banking, and I'm sure data decentralization must be giving you goosebumps.
No, I think I do agree with we tend to go with the technology aspects, right? How we look at from the domain and how do we break it down further. So, and centralized and decentralized part of it, they are in a hybrid kind of one. We kind of look at from that perspective itself. I think I do agree with Suresh, and so that is what we look at, and we kind of like look based on the business model itself, like what we are looking at, whether we are looking at with the like building this model across the centralized model or the decentralized. It's the business what does it, what we business perspective from the IT kind of person, and how the all these models are working on the domain wise, be it in any industry you are. So we kind of use the hybrid model quite a lot, and that's how we put progress on.
If I may add one more, sorry, if I may add one more thing, Vishesh, let's think about 20 years ago, Excel used to be done by IT team,
Yes.
right? So business used to come to IT team to do Excel work. They don't come to us today. So it has become a citizen developer type of an environment. Many tools today are very similar to Excel. If we are going to put a restriction from IT that this is my tech stack, these are the tools you need to use, then we are going to hit the efficiency of the business team. I think that's why I am very strong believer we have to move towards IT should just focus on the core and probably leave it to the business to give the agility and the speed so that they can move at the speed that they want to actually meet the challenges that they have on day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and that also, basically dovetails into the whole direction the industry is moving into, because we are seeing a rise in the edge and how AI is getting deployed across edge devices as well. And it makes perfect sense, right? Because I see three advocates of decentralization over here, surprisingly, Parvez as well from banking industry. I expected that least, but thumbs up to Parvez as well, right? So if banking industry is doing that, why can't anybody else do it, right? So good. That's a big thumbs up for decentralization, for edge. But while we are all gung-ho about decentralization, citizen developers, more power to business users, no code concepts, control code concepts, all these are coming up. There will be some pitfalls that we need to take care of, right? As IT leaders, what should we be aware of while we are deciding or working with our leaders in giving more power to business users? And should this be a sort of a flexible strategy, or should it be a firm strategy? What is the point of view around that? So let's start with Parvez this time.
From the business aspects, I think we still look at the centralized way of working in many of the places which we looked at. Like I've been working across various projects in both the areas because I come from the IT sector itself. So that's how we kind of look at. And so one of the things is like it can go to a certain level of centralization of data where we look at from the big data space and we get the data across, and from there we break it down into a decentralized way of looking at things for various models and can putting it across various products which we have in the reports kind of thing. So that is what I look at from that perspective itself.
Thank you, Parvez. Let's hear from you, Suresh. What are the pitfalls that as IT leaders we need to be aware about?
See, I think the data governance security becomes the biggest risk if the IT leaders can focus on what kind of strategy needs to be built to ensure that these two things are taken care, especially when data is decentralized. See, today, many companies have data centralized in data lakes, but the consumption is decentralized. But I think slowly we might have to move towards to give the data autonomy, to give the speed and agility, and to avoid the bottlenecks arising to a single source data sets, right? Those kind of things. I mean, performance, a lot of things are impacted because of centralizing data. I think as IT leaders, we have to look at all these parameters and figure out what kind of data can be decentralized, what kind of data should be centralized, especially if we are looking at large scale, scalable, big data kind of solutions. Probably it will make sense to stay in a centralized way. I'll give a very simple example. Let's take our sales team. So the sales team primarily relies on the CRM. What is the point in bringing the CRM data into a centralized data lake and then exposing the data to the sales team? Can that data be decentralized and only data from there can be picked up by the users to drive analytics rather than coming to data lake? I think there are a few pockets like this. Only when we want to marry data between different systems, then come out with insights, maybe a centralized model is required, and that would require expertise. So obviously IT team has to play a role. Wherever there is data can be independent, not too much of intertangling with other systems, probably we can start with decentralizing in those areas. As we learn, we can start decentralizing the centralized data as well. How we organize our centralized data. Do we want to go for a big data lake, or do we want to have multiple small lakes? Those are some of the things I think will evolve in the future as we move towards more decentralized mechanism.
Fair point. Thank you, Suresh. Ravindra, so data decentralization, what are the red flags that we should be aware of? And what is the role of tech teams in driving this decentralization?
I think mostly it was covered well. Suresh and Parvez have mostly talked about all the points. I think one interesting thing which Suresh brought about was like when we talk about decentralization, right? So there are two touch points where you can do decentralization. One is at data layer, one is at compute layer, right? So which he called out. You can still have data in a more central kind of a setup like a data lake. But if your compute is decentralized, right? So that essentially would give us that power of parallelizing things and speed up things and become more efficient, right? But having said that, I think it's not always the case that companies bring everything to just Delta Lake and then make compute decentralized, right? Both, like it's a hybrid again, right? Certain portion of your data would reside in isolation, but a large portion where you need to do analytics. Nowadays, people follow bringing that data together into a centralized setup and then decentralize the compute, right? So that's one approach people have been taking. And the pitfalls again are when you decentralize, you let go certain controls, right? Governance and access control. You let go certain amount of information and probably you also tend to create redundancy as well, right? So same data or same information is overloaded at multiple places, and plus you also see amount of information loss also happening. If it's a central system, you have a very consistent kind of a setup, right? But in a decentralized one, these are the pitfalls I would like to add on top of what already Suresh called out or always called out.
Very rightly pointed out. So you are talking about the data duplication which might happen, and then the frameworks and other things that one needs to take care of. These are the pitfalls from a data decentralization perspective. Surprisingly, none of you is talking about cost. Cost seems to be least of the worries. I think, Suresh, you made a point on cost, but otherwise, everybody is quite okay with the cost factor in the decentralized environments, which obviously increase. But sorry, Ravindra, you seem to be thinking something about cost. Any point you want to make?
So I think I was alluding to that only when I tried to separate two layers, data layer and the compute layer, right?
Okay.
So when you try to attribute cost, storing data in a centralized or a decentralized setup, that has probably lesser attribution to actual cost. Compute is where majority of your cost goes, right? And that is where in like disproportionately when you decentralize versus if you're in a centralized setup where the vertical compute is vertical, you need to bring in supercomputers if you have to compute throughout historical data, right? And that's where your costs shoot up, right? So maybe that was one point where we did not explicitly call out cost.
No, thanks for bubbling this up.
But I can add something to that cost, right? I mean, I as IT people, we will always get slightly inclined towards infrastructure and stuff. But right, see, personally, I feel decentralizing might also have not just at the infrastructure layer, but at people and cost. That has a potential to come down because giving the power to the users to do what they have to do. So not everything will come to IT to have a team to build it and give it to them, right? Probably the prototype building will happen before the business comes to us. So probably the prototyping cost might come down, right? But I completely agree with Ravinder. One of the key things that we have to look at as IT team is how the cost be managed effectively, especially if we move towards decentralized kind of mechanism.
Brilliant. That brings me to the last question of this panel, right? And it's a very simple one. What should we tell in the ears of our leadership, our board, our CEOs, our CMDs, which will make them commit to the data decentralization and the AI capabilities on top of that? What are the magic words that we should tell them? Suresh?
I think the transfer of power from IT to business, I think that will be the first one, which everybody wants. I think a lot of people look at IT as a barrier because they ask a lot of questions. So transfer of power is one of the things. And I think it gives speed and agility to the business to move at the pace that they want to move. Is if we have to do it in a centralized way, we might have to look at prioritization, my backlog, all those. So I think that is what the CEOs, CFOs would love. Lower cost, the power is with your team. You can pick and choose what you want to do. Unless you need IT, you need not come to us.
Brilliant. I'm sure these are magic words if you ask me. Ravindra, any magic words that you would like to say, suggest?
I'll pick from Suresh's. Empowerment,
Yes.
agility, and cost. I think these are the three key.
Absolutely. Now, Suresh made very rock solid points. Absolutely. And Parvez?
Yeah, kind of agree with Suresh and Ravindra, but I think one of the things is that the things get done faster, and it's with the business who can build their models easily. They do not have to come to each time to an IT team to build that model. So they can change the model at their own, and they can show their results, what the results they are expecting, maybe a quarter on quarter the growth or anything what they're looking at. I think they can build that model faster than what. And then the cost effectiveness is one of the things I think is what I was looking at.
And I think the speed of experimentation is the crux over here. It will increase drastically because nobody's trying to understand what somebody else is trying to do and then convert it into a capability. People, experiment, they fail, they learn, they redevelop, and they move on, right? Definitely the magic words that all CXO leaders would like to hear from us. I think that brings me to the end of this discussion. Any parting words over here, Parvez? Any parting words from you?
I think presently, I think we look at the best thing is that we look at both the models, centralized and decentralized ones, and look at which model grow with the business, and that is the only thing which we can. We make the model maturer and maturer as we go on.
Absolutely. Ravindra?
I would say this hybrid of centralized versus decentralized, this is going to stay. These are solving specific use cases which are going to exist in the future as well.
Absolutely. Suresh, any parting words from you?
No, I think both of them have covered, but I want to leave with one thought, right? How is IT going to enable this? Okay. To make business move towards this decentralized path.
That's important.
I think that's going to be critical because if we leave it to the business, it will go haywire.
True.
So we have to partner and ensure that it is going in the right path so that the governance, the cost, the security, and the agility are taken care. It goes back to the same 4 key important things.
You're bang on, Suresh. And I want to thank you, all the participants on the call, Ravindra from Misho, Parvez from HSBC, and Suresh from GE Vernova, for making it to this panel. And I learned a lot, right? I'm sure all the viewers who will attend this, this session will also get to learn a lot. Thank you very much for joining this call, gentlemen.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
For more updates from CXO TV, please like and subscribe to our channel.